Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the War Report. Now, we'll start out as we usually do and visit events in Syria. Now, there hasn't been much going on this week. There's been a few new news events. As we said on Friday, Idlib, northwestern Syria, is probably looking at an escalation in fighting over the coming weeks. Now, that has not happened yet, but as those of you who can see on the map, you can probably see the green gun icon near Idlib with the red gun icon surrounding it. Now, that isn't a sign of fighting, but that is a sign of a troop buildup of opposition forces. And there were some mumblings in Turkey, so usual news out of there. And like we said on Friday, just keep an eye on that. Uh, there has been a few interesting events in northeastern Syria. Now, there was allegedly a falling out between U.S. coalition forces and Syrian Democratic forces, which, for those of you not in the know, pretty much mostly, if not all, Kurdish militias. And yeah, that's that big yellow chunk right there on the map, as you can see on the key. But
Yeah.
for first timers, this may be your first foray into this. Just laying that out for you. But both sides have adamantly denied this. Leaders of the SDF had said, "Oh, there's been no falling out. Cooperation is as strong as ever." I haven't heard any similar statements from the American side. At least anything significant, of course. The regular press releases that go unnoticed, the dozens they put out a day, and yeah, it is a bit odd, as I'll get into, looking at the map in Syria today and the situation in Syria today when you consider that 2 years ago and also 3 years ago, but mainly 2 years ago is the one I want to focus on. Many people thought we were staring down the barrel of war with Syria. Now, of course, as we record this, this is April 7th, 2020. 2 years ago, the Assad regime definitely, no skepticism there, despite what the Pentagon may say, despite what intelligence officials may say, despite what even Mattis ended up saying. The Assad regime definitely perpetrated a chemical attack in northwestern Syria near Idlib against those moderate rebels who just wanted to establish a liberal democracy and have freedom and gay rights in Syria. That is the
Yeah.
official narrative. We would never dispute that. We do not peddle conspiracy theories on this show. And lo and behold, the most that came out of that was a joint U.S., UK, French strike on specific vital Syrian targets. Now, of course, that was rumored to destroy half their air force and uh, half of their air defenses. And of course, these joint strikes by the U.S., UK, and France were preceded by a week of air skirmishes with Israel. Israel launched several missile strikes and several air strikes from pilot aircrafts, UAV, the works, and really Syrian air defenses got to show what they were really made of. That was pretty much the first time in the war that they were put up to that challenge, and even with S-200s, they fared well. Now, the reason I bring this up, it's a bit amazing to think that with all of Trump's bluster, with the what seemed like very real concern on the Russians' part in the lead up to this, how things have pretty much gone in the opposite direction that a lot of people thought they were going to be. Now, for context, we covered this heavily on the show that like some of our first episodes were about this. And we were genuinely concerned. We didn't think it was likely, but we realized the significant possibility that this could be another regime change war, even if it's not a boost on the ground, even if it was a Gaddafi style, Libya style regime change effort. And I feared that even if it wasn't, it would be enough to destabilize Syria, especially when Trump came out and said he would want a sustained campaign against Syria. Now, fortunately, that didn't pan out. But out of all the times where things could have gone wrong, even including some of the more recent stuff with Turkey, with Israel, I think April of 2018 is when had the most potential for all hell to break loose in Syria. And that's saying something. I mean, considering all hell has already
Yeah.
broken loose. But, I mean, again, with how much further you can push that with an outright regime change effort, an outright targeted effort against Assad, even if it isn't targeted at regime change. And taking all that into consideration and looking at the map today, where most of it is in red, the red lines just keep on growing every day. The borders of eastern Syria and northwestern Syria shrink inch by inch every day. It's remarkable. It's amazing to look at how much things have changed, and the point where the U.S. has all but given up. They've become both an impotent and minuscule fighting force, beyond the fact that they're defending the oil fields. They really have no other operations there, and the only time they get involved if there's any threat to the specific oil fields that they are protecting, they'll let Syrian forces operate anywhere not in the oil fields. They'll let Russian forces operate anywhere not in the oil fields. Now, the times they've turned around Syrian and Russian convoys, which are few and far between, it's because they got too close to the oil fields. It wasn't. I mean, you try this back then, it would have been the entire Euphrates they were guarding. But now,
Right.
it's just amazing to see how much that's deteriorated.
Right, and there's a kind of another deterioration that's happening with a different polity in Syria, and that is initially, we all remember the years where, the CIA was funding one set of moderate beheaders while the Pentagon was funding another set of moderate beheaders. And now what's happened is there's discord within Kurdish groups. And so one of the things we didn't see back then was Kurds working with Syrians, and they have stopped American patrols several times in that northern yellow section. There's also been recent attacks. It's still not exactly clear who did them, which has resulted in the death of apparently one U.S. serviceman and two, I guess, combatants or just whatever jihadis they're working with at the moment, and several conflicting groups both confirmed the same story. So you have the factions that are within Idlib that are aligned with Al Qaeda affiliate Al Sham, basically confirming that. You have a Lebanese Hezbollah faction fighting in Syria, confirming that, and you have Syrian sources confirming that. The only one who's not confirming it as of yet is the U.S. Now, the U.S. has left another base in Iraq. This comes after they left Kirkuk. This particular base is close to the Iraqi border, and some of the troops have been deployed from there into the oil fields in Syria. So they are bolstering theirs. Last week I mentioned that they would go for a more concentrated effort, and that is the case. So the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, which is a very big complex, a very well-guarded complex,
What
just
is it, like
increased.
a quarter of the size of the Vatican? Something obscene like
It's
that.
nearly the size of Vatican, of Vatican City, of the entire city.
Oh, yeah.
So two new Patriot missile systems have been moved in there, and some of these forces that have left the fourth base in Iraq are moving there. There has been exchange of shelling. Finally, Syrians are shelling back Turkish forces, proper Turkish army forces, as well as Turkish-backed militants in Idlib. Uh, Turkey is still fortifying new positions. They're still rolling in. I think between 2,000 to 2,500 men and machinery have moved in, both in Idlib and Greater Idlib province. That's the area that is no longer controlled by militants. They've even asked for aid packages from the U.S. I just love that. um, It just never ends. It just never ends. So yeah, Syria is more or less calm. We don't know so far. There aren't that many cases or reported cases, and there's probably not that much ability right now to deal with coronavirus. But it probably will emerge there.
Yeah, the one report I was actually going to touch on is
Mhm.
they let in some Iraqi-backed forces, Iranian-backed forces from Iraq, and Iranian supplies in the country, and there's some source saying that's violating the quarantine, which, I mean, if the government's letting them in, I don't see how that's necessarily a violation of quarantine. Maybe it's not the best idea, but just from a
Yeah.
legalistic standpoint, I think they kind of get to determine the rules of the quarantine, the boundaries of it. But
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. I think, especially a country whose infrastructure has been so degraded over the past almost decade at this point, they're probably going to be pretty cautious with who and what they let in. At least I would think, or at least I'd think that Russia would say something, or the Iranians would have the common sense to not infect their allies. Because frankly, I give more credit to the Iranian government than a lot of people do. I don't think they're that malicious or incompetent to the point where they would affect pro-government Syrian forces. But again, despite what some may tell you, I mean, apparently they're both backing both ISIS and Assad simultaneously. If you ask some of these neoconservatives, but whatever. On that note, but yeah, it seems inevitable, and like I said, in a country whose infrastructure has been so degraded over the past 9, 10 years. So I mean, it seems like they've got under control now with sterilization efforts and just the measures other countries implementing, such as masks, uh, stay-at-home orders to a degree. But I mean, I'm mainly concerned if this reaches, for example, like the front line, like Idlib, where there's active fighting. These things can't really be enforced.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I would agree with you there. But yeah, other than that, there's not that much happening in Syria. The patrols. I suppose we should talk about them. Uh, they're haphazard. They're cut off. We're still dealing with Idlib protesters. They literally mimic the Western style with the. They even have these makeshift flags that like only have one side of the flag with the printed colors, and the other side is like blank. So yeah, so I guess the Pentagon is like low on bucks as they're renting mobs, but they're not really that great. They could be better. um, I mean, literally nobody is convinced by it. This is really a war that has been kind of forgotten, or it's been wanted to be forgotten by not just Americans, but by the West in general. And they're never going to get the support that they so desperately need, because honestly, the situation, to really dramatically turn it around, they would have to bomb Syria like they did Libya. Um, the war is nearly 10 years old now. And furthermore, there's other hotspots that are developing and other scenarios that are directly impacting, said players like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, uh, and America with regards to Syria by other means, whether it's the war in Yemen, whether it's oil wars. All of this we'll get into.
Oh yes, of course, but yeah, I'm still shocked just how rapidly things changed in Syria. Now I think we all saw the direction was in the government's favor, but to this
Mm-hmm.
extent, this rapidly, and with especially even just some cooperation with the SDF, uh, yeah, and Turkey being absolutely humiliated. I don't know any other way to put it. It's just amazing how, again, not only that it went in that direction, but it seems like it accelerates every year in favor of that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, everybody is still wondering about what is Turkey going to do next, and it doesn't seem like Turkey knows what to do next. I've been seeing like write-ups about a new canal that they want to build that would allow basically American ships to go through there by avoiding the Straits of Hormuz into the Black Sea.
You mean the
But that would
Bosphorus?
be, yes, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but this would be over a decade in the making, and I don't see anything happening right now. Certainly, 2020 will not be the year that kicks off.
Oh, you mean the
And
2023 project they had? They've been hyping for the 100th anniversary of the Republic. Not gonna pan out. You're telling me I can't believe it.
yeah, yeah. And Turkey's fortunes in Libya are also not going that well. There's now various Syrian groups that they have brought there that are also fighting amongst each other. This is a feature that we've seen in Syria, but now we're seeing it in Libya as well. Um, Last week, I mentioned that that the Houthi forces, I think, what did they call the Ansar Allah? Anyways, the Houthi forces, and they have now started to get even closer and are attacking even more effectively against Saudi-backed groups in an area I believe it's called Maris or Marib. Um, this is also on top of them routinely now firing into and hitting targets in Saudi Arabia proper. So I mentioned last week that basically, if this region falls, we're looking at a possible collapse of Syria, or like to prevent. The only way to prevent that is literally for America to get involved more directly. And in my estimation, if you think Americans don't want to get involved in Syria, wait till you try to pitch them a war in Yemen. So yeah, so Enter Allah is basically uh, pushing forward there. This is in the Marib province. This is toward the east central area of the country. So it'll be interesting to watch what's happening there. Convoys have been completely decimated in that area, and we'll see how that develops in the coming week. I guess as oil prices continue to plummet, uh, Saudi Arabia will have to think about its priorities. And this will also have an effect on Qatar as well, because, we're talking about a force that does not have jets. They literally don't have bombers. They don't have jet fighters. But I'm very sure that the Houthis are going to have more and more effective drones, perhaps drones that are able to at least drop small munitions. So far, they haven't had to use them. It's really incredible when you think about uh, the amount of damage, the amount of human cost that this war has caused on their major cities that have like really eschewed mass starvation. And the kind of resilience that we're seeing of a force that's much less well funded, uh, like we already mentioned, isn't capable of having an air force, doesn't really have a navy except for sabotage units, and so on. And so this war is moving more in their favor than ever before. And this generally is creating like essentially a pincer movement that has heavy Iranian influence. This will worry Saudi Arabia and Israel and America, not to mention Qatar. So I don't know if they're willing to take this as a loss on top of Syria. So in a sense, it's giving some kind of relief to Syria because it's pressing the situation. Um, Yemen, in no small way, is as strategically located as Syria is in
Oh,
terms of
absolutely.
the oil trade.
And
So
you
it'll be interesting to watch.
you have set me off on what's going to be a tangent, a couple of tangents actually. But you bring up Yemen. I mean, just to put that in perspective, they're what people would pejoratively call bottle rockets are hitting targets in Riyadh. They're hitting the airport. They're hitting
Yeah.
infrastructure in the capital city of Saudi Arabia, and that's on top of the pressures of the oil wars you brought up, which we'll get into later. On top of again this massive disease outbreak that's affecting pretty much every country in the world. Uh, it's on top of again just the shifts in Syria, and I don't see how there can't be a some sort of involvement. And like I said, it's going to be a hard word to sell. But they're going to have to find some way, shape, or form to do it, even if it's completely underhanded. They're going to have to intervene somehow. Because I would say if Saudi Arabia folds, not even if they collapse, but if they fold on Yemen, if they take the loss, as it were, it would cause a global shift that we have not seen on the scale since the end of World War One. I'm going to say that outright, no
Hmm.
exaggerations, anything. But
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's happening now. But I'm saying if Saudi Arabia folds in Yemen, it will have that much of a ripple effect.
Yes. And it's interesting to note how the coronavirus crisis has merely exacerbated this because not that the aid that China has provided has always been good. There have been, of course, some masks, for instance, that have apparently been contaminated, or some of the test kits aren't working, or are subpar. But the vast majority of the time, um, China, and to also an important degree Russia, have stepped in to essentially deal with the crisis. Well, America has basically sanctioned Turkey to stop delivery, and in order that they can take these supplies. I've also heard that Israel apparently bought up respirators and masks that the U.S. federal government could have used.
Oh yeah,
So this has created a shortage. No, I mean, no surprise there. Of course, if Israel was suffering as the way the U.S. is suffering right now through a coronavirus, Blump would be right on it. Uh, there would be there would be no hesitation. He would never call it a hoax. He would never think it was the Dems trying to stop his reelection, or that it would just miraculously go away. So, I mean, that's where he stands, basically.
yeah. And just to touch on your point about the aid provided, like, yeah, there has been faulty aid. There has been stories about China selling back the aid given to them at the beginning of this. But at the end of the day, with a lot of it in terms of just media perception, a lot of it got on early. Those stories came out later. What people hear first would tend to stick with them. So even let's say even if 100% of it was completely worthless and it was all just like made out of just plastic and just completely unusable. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but my point being is it's not so much the effectiveness of the aid, it's so much as the act of giving the aid with how it looks on the international stage. Again, it's a war of optics. It's a propaganda war
Yeah.
more than the actual effectiveness of the equipment. But you brought up a point with we touched on this on Friday with sort of the outbidding for masks and a bit of an outlandish prediction I'm going to make going throughout the year, especially throughout the summer. I have a feeling we're going to start seeing like mask piracy wars where we see almost a
Mhm.
return of privateers, outsourcing like Somali pirates or whatever. Maybe not Somali pirates, probably something a bit more sophisticated. but outsourcing like a bunch of non-state actors to hijack masks and ship them to your country. And again, that will probably involve yeah, organized crime. Probably on this. The cartel might make up for some of their losses that they've experienced recently by dealing in masks rather than drugs. Yeah, I foresee throughout this year the masked black market becoming a thing, and for it becoming another proxy war between countries.
Right, and so the situation is so different from, and I mean, we are talking about this post World War II order, and it's amazing that the deterioration that it's gone through, and also to echo what you said earlier about how this will forever change this order and basically our world going forward. There was an interesting piece that Henry Kissinger wrote in the Wall Street Journal. I'll just quickly read this to you, just to kind of highlight how even Henry is so out of touch. Drawing lessons from the development of the Marshall Plan and the Manhattan Project, the U.S. is obliged to undertake a major effort in three domains. First, shore up global resistance to infectious diseases. Second, strive to heal the wounds to the world economy. You'd think the world economy is literally koofing right now. And third, safeguard the principles of the liberal world order.
Oh yeah, that's
I mean,
priority number one right there. We got to make sure the pride
yeah,
parades don't
uh,
stop and the McDonald's stay open.
yes. Yeah, so he goes, while the assault on human health will hopefully be temporary, the political and economic upheaval it has unleashed could last for generations. No country, not even the US, can, in purely national effort, overcome the virus. So, of course, he's going to make the plea of working globally. But how to do that? How to do that with China and Russia? How is that really going to be possible? Isn't that across cross purposes? Um, it's hilarious to me that this piece got written. If anybody, I mean, you are seeing like definite fear from the highest lieutenants of the neoliberal order right now, who are definitely panicking, and we see this in the oil war. So Trump right now, even the state of Texas could uh, bring a resolution to the crisis, which is over oil production at extremely low prices. Smaller oil companies have already, there's already been layoffs in the thousands. Halliburton Oil has mentioned that they have lost 40% profits. Uh, Unlike Saudi Arabia and Russia, the oil companies are not run by the government, or or have predominantly government control. So these are private enterprises, and I forget the name of it, but there's an oil commission that also wrote Trump and basically told him that we have to solve this problem, but you know. This would be tyranny if if we ordered companies to stop producing this quantity of oil. So, I mean, why are they saying this? Well, they're saying this so companies like BP and other big oil giants will just buy out these smaller shale companies. They have no problem doing that. In fact, they're waiting for it. But even big operations like Halliburton are hurting right now. So I don't fully understand the logic behind this. I suppose there's some countries that are some corporations that are waiting this out and see a kind of silver lining after all of this. There is supposed to be a meeting tomorrow, but it doesn't seem like it's confirmed. This would have been unprecedented. This is unprecedented if it happens, and that is the U.S. is going to send envoys to Russia and Saudi Arabia in order to reduce production. Let's not forget that it was Saudi Arabia that wanted to slow down production, not Russia. So Yeah, this is turning into a major mess, and Russia has the bigger reserves, but who doesn't have the reserves are the small companies, the small shale companies in the U.S. And they already had some very bad years between around 2014, 15, where they lost about 200,000 jobs, and that was half the oil sector jobs. I have a friend who worked during the prime years of shale here in Canada, in Alberta, and even the so-called recovery has not meant the kind of recovery that you would think prior to uh, that sort of bad spot that we went through about 6, 7 years ago. So this is going to be very interesting how they're going to attempt to resolve this. Um, because it doesn't seem like there's kind of any end in sight. The amount of job losses right now are skyrocketing. Uh, Places, as far as oil concerned, like Texas, Louisiana, Alaska, some of those more northern states that have oil and gas, they're going to be affected as well. So yeah, I I don't know what Trump is going to do. He has these powers. He could call for lower production if all three countries, Russia, the U.S., and Saudi Arabia, took part in it. It would probably be best, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Oh yeah, and
I mean, I think Saudi Arabia and Russia would welcome it.
I think they would too. But I think the big reason you're seeing a push from Saudi Arabia for this is some of the stuff we covered in Yemen, but not a push from Russia, is because this entire virus situation pretty much put all the shaky economies, as it were, in the red, where recession is
Mm-hmm.
inevitable. Now, whether that be countries that admit it, like Russia, where they say, we may have to dip into our emergency financial reserves, or countries like Germany, who at the end of 2019 were still fudging the numbers to just have a couple tenths of a percent of economic growth. I think they report 0.1% economic growth or something like that. You have a few other cases with some larger economies in Europe like that, but I think what is happening right now, especially from the Russian perspective, I said this last episode, is they realize that they're in the red anyway, so they're going to make it as painful as possible for OPEC, for the American energy industry, and just again until things sort themselves out, because uh, they can weather this crisis. But it is interesting, the thing you bring up with the fact that yeah, in the United States, the energy industry, especially the oil industry, is mostly private, whereas in Saudi Arabia and Russia, it's either state owned or state co opted. And like you said, Trump
Mm-hmm.
has those emergency powers, but keep in mind, just, maybe not Trump directly, but politicians, especially Republicans, receive a lot of money from oil companies. So it's not going to be that easy when they're telling them you want to lower the prices, even though if they would stop and look at the big picture for 5 minutes, they would realize in the long term, it would mean their benefit. In the short term, it may be a little bit more painful, but if you don't do this now, it's going to be much worse later, which again is a problem you see throughout the neoliberal system time and time again. Things are brought up. For example, like with the economic shutdown, it's either we can rip this band aid off now, and again, also with the emergency payments, with a lot of these things, you can rip the band-aid off now, get it over with, or you can just keep on kicking the can down the road. Which I can only imagine which option we're going to take, and I think everyone in the audience probably knows which option the United States and the Western world at large is
Yeah.
going to take. But now that we've covered the oil wars, I think it's time for one of the biggest stories of the week, and that is Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the UK, is in intensive care after being diagnosed with the coronavirus, I believe, 2 weeks ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Apparently, he's not on a respirator, but he is being fed oxygen, but it's under the power of his own lungs. So his situation could be far, far worse.
or at least what they're letting us know his situation is.
Right. There's always that possibility.
Yeah, and
That I mean, we don't know for sure.
again, with something like this, like just in general, there's so many uncertainties. But one of the few things I've been able to corroborate, a lot of other people have been able to piece together, is that if you're going on the respirator, your chances are not very good. And like they said, as far as we know, he is not on a respirator. But the fact that it's gotten that bad for a politician, it says a lot, especially considering the fact that he was one of the ones who was skeptical of it, where he said,
Mhm.
we just need to build up the herd immunity. Again, Sweden was one of the other ones that really hammered on about this, but the UK especially. And then he reneged on that. Then he announced he was diagnosed with the illness, and then we're here right now. Now, he is in his 50s. I thought he was much older, but judging just by looking at him, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know his exact, uh,
I think he's
physical state.
56 or 55.
Yeah.
No, how old is 55, I think.
Yeah, he was much younger than I expected. I thought he was in his late 60s.
Hmm.
But he also at least appears to be slightly overweight, so he has that going for him. And even someone in their 50s probably, again, they're at higher risk than somebody in their 30s or 40s. And I don't know whether other health conditions he has. And I'm not necessarily saying I think this is going to happen, but I mean, I was talking about monumental shifts when I was talking about Yemen. Imagine what would happen if a victim of this. I mean, there's been prominent victims of this, mainly entertainers, but if a leader of a country succumbed to this, the
Hmm.
game would be
Yeah.
entirely changed. All the people him hawing about, oh, do we shut it down? We have to weigh the cost and benefits, and who still think there's a snowball's chance in hell of salvaging the economy from what's coming. I think they'd be changing their tune pretty quickly when one of their own actually falls victim to it. Not only being infected with it, but actually uh, results in their demise.
Right. I mean, we're seeing this argument developing, and it's also developing right now in the dissident right too. Between opening up the economy again, or keeping things shut down, but somehow paying for it all. One of the interesting things is how this also relates to the bigger geopolitical developments. And that is when you look at, for instance, China's One Belt, One Road and the amount of countries that are interested in it, one of the reasons why, say, for instance, American finance and, America and sort of, um, let's say the Anglo and Jewish power of the world is kind of afraid of this thing is because with the exception of India, that has not really improved life all that much for the average Indian. It has sold its country to corporations, and One Belt, One Road works on a more kind of a nationalistic and Keynesian kind of infrastructure-led growth model. And so like I think if America adopted something like this, of course, right now, well, I mean, it's arguably too late. Like, can it be done now? Uh, if there was some kind of cooperation, perhaps it could be done now.
Yeah, we're not going to
Um,
get some sort of FDR New Deal cooperation thing that we had in the Great Depression or World War II. Those I'd hate to say I'd hate to say it, but those days are over to the point where we can consolidate ourselves in a time of crisis. Now, look, you can attribute that to demographic factors, which again is valid. You can attribute it to many things, or just sort of the decline of the American spirit, as it were. But you make the point that yeah, for whatever reason, those countries they can still manage that, whereas in the West and Western influenced countries such as India, it's sort of in the hands of multinational corporations.
Right. So, I mean, this is why you have like the biggest corporations and the biggest banks, you know, both afraid of the impact and at the same time opportunistically looking up to buy the smaller companies and the smaller banks and so on. But um, in the end, you're still going to have a populace that literally will not be able to buy the kind of goods that you need them to buy. We're looking at possibilities of, unemployment rates, ranging from 25 to 30%. Some say higher
I believe over the past
within the
two
coming
weeks
months.
as of today, we've reached the 10 million mark over the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, it's just a hair over 10 million. Um, I mean, it's that model, right? Like in a way, these mom and pop shops are like those countries that make their deal with the devil, where essentially they sell some of their sovereignty and some of their assets, and that's it. It's You have to then depend on what they do and see if they can incorporate you into their economy. But judging from the way the last 30 years have gone, they won't. And we touched on this last week, where uh, our guess was, and it was actually your guess that you pointed out that are we really going? I mean, you hear chatter about this. Trump had Navarro at his press meeting, essentially outlining the ills of globalism and what kind of mess the U.S. is in right now, which is why I think it's so ironic and ridiculous that Kissinger should write an article about how America is going to lead based on the Marshall Plan, as if America is in that position at the moment. And this is why he has to reiterate a global effort, because America within can't do it. Its industry has been offshored. Um, but you did mention India, and like sadly, I think they're going to make a deal with India, and that will be used as a way to block both the One Belt One Road and but what are they going to give India? Like besides bringing in more Indians to take away American jobs, how how are they going to change the situation radically? The way the situation has changed radically in China for the average Chinese person in the last 20 years, because it has, it's undeniable. And India has
Maybe they
not
can
kept
start
up
with
pace with
indoor plumbing.
that. It's awful. So, you have to ask yourself about the initiative, like, is the initiative as strong amongst Indians as it was amongst the Chinese? Uh, Ultimately, what this proved was that I mean, I remember those years when we ridiculed Chinese products that were inferior, and many of them, of course, still are very much inferior, and deserve that euphemism about being made in China. But on the other hand, though, you know, your Apple products for the last 15 years are all coming from there, and there's all kinds of electronic goods that are coming from there, phones, cameras, what have you, and they've started their own companies, which dominate the Asian market, which is a population that's several times larger than that of America's and Europe's. So, um, yeah, it's I don't know. Like I mean, I don't have an answer. I don't know what we're going to do. If there was a cut in the military budget, that could that could help, but in a way
But then
that
The
escalates.
Romanians might not get their Rainbow Patriot missiles.
That's true. That's true. And what Russia's going to do? They're going to take away their gay pride parades. So Russia's going to invade the Baltics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're just preparing. I can tell they want those they want to subjugate those Lithuanian polyamorous relationships.
I was actually tempted on a recent video I saw about that, about a possible invasion of the Baltic countries. I was going to write something like, if Russia invades, gay pride parades are over. Just let that sink in.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too sidetracked, but on the bright side of all the things this virus canceled, I believe Pride Month is one of them.
That's true. That's true. And actually, while we're talking about Northern Europe, a Russian vessel is due to reach Nord Stream 2 and will be laying a pipeline within the next 24 hours.
Wow. Now,
So
hold on to that because
that's interesting. Yeah. But
I do want to return to that, but
so sorry.
I did hold on to that point because I was actually going to get into that. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, in terms of everything we just discussed, I mean, India. The last point I wanted to make on that was the West is trying to pull it into their orbit, and one of the big things I think that really shows the flaw of just industry hopping, as it were, what we sort of discussed on Friday, is that hydrochloroquine is the drug that has been the center of quite a bit of controversy, at least in the United States, of course, because Trump recommended it. The anti-Trump forces are instinctively against it. When there's been some successful trials in Italy and parts of Europe and Brazil, and now India, who manufactures most of the drug, has banned export of it.
Oh, wow. What were the reasons?
They said we need it for ourselves, basically.
Ah, I see. I see.
But yeah, I just wanted to put a bow on that topic. But uh, now again, we'll return to some of the Nord Stream 2 stuff when we get into the other Rush stuff, which is what I want to close the show out with. But yeah, in terms of the lockdown in Italy, it's really starting to take its toll because there has been looting now. It's gotten that desperate.
Yep.
The financial savings of the people is really starting to run out, and Italy isn't a financial hub the likes of the United States, the UK, even arguably France and Germany. They're still, for a first world country, one of the less powerful ones, both militarily and economically. And they're starting to see that strain. And look, people think we're only 2 3 weeks behind Italy, but I can tell you one thing: it would take a lot longer for something like that to happen in Europe because we are a financial hub. I'm sure you've seen it. It's probably a bit dated at this point to say, but the money printer does go burr or whatever. Uh, so yeah, you could probably stave that off longer in the U.S. and the U.K. But yeah, we're starting. I mean, Italy has been such, at risk of sounding a bit morbid, has been such an interesting case in terms of it's really the first Western liberal democracy to face this crisis, and it was also one of the most heavily impacted countries of this. Now, you can chalk up part of that to the fact that the Italian government, no matter what system, is not the most efficient, not the most well organized. That is a fair point. That has plagued them for centuries now, even before the proper unification of the reunification of the peninsula, more appropriately. But what you saw is it took them that long. They didn't shut down travel right away. They ended flights to their credit, but they still had the massive Chinese diaspora population, the massive Chinese business population, and the government, of course, pushing the anti-xenophobia measures, whatever. And lo and behold, they're the worst hit. And then they eventually cave and issue the lockdowns, whatever. They cave and they issue all these other things. They suspend some mortgage payments, rents payments, whatever. And even all of that, now maybe if they would have done it earlier, it would have turned out better. Look, that there's a case to be made for that, but I think it was just delayed the inevitable for a country like this. But what you see is the culmination of where now that looting has started, and it look, let's be honest, it's probably only going to get worse from here. It's showing the
Yeah.
cracks in what was left of neoliberal democracy, and at this point, it's either going to be complete crackdown, police state, at least temporarily until the crisis is over, if not longer, or utter collapse.
Yeah, I don't see how it can manage otherwise. I would strongly suspect that Russia will probably intervene with food. Someone will have to. Uh, I don't know if the states can. Certainly, no other EU country is going to do that. So I don't know what its options are, other than appealing to Russia or China, which would be just adding on to the irony that's been developing these last 3 4 weeks. Uh, Italy has lost over 17,000 people uh, to coronavirus. So it's the highest amount of any country. And speaking of other southern European countries that are going to be facing very harsh austerity measures in the coming months and years, is Spain with the second highest fatality. I believe they're at 13 or 14,000 dead so far.
Yeah, and they
Um,
just also implemented a
I would
an emergency UBI, so just add that on to their financial problems.
right, right, and so I don't see, the immediate problem, of course, is to provide food. Um, uh, and so far, that doesn't seem to be an answer right now. So we hope that Italy is able to overcome this. We hope that somebody comes to their aid.
Yeah, I at this point, it's again, it has to come from the outside, and I mean, you figure with all the aid we throw at whatever various worthless programs, or you figure we would have something, and that to this point, the United States, the EU has bungled it, and my guess is probably going to be Russia. And again, that just adds on to this. The Russians have been the biggest winner of all of this in terms of optics, in terms of propaganda. And
Yeah,
yeah, I don't
yeah,
see it.
yeah. They have. You can even see the way this is crossing across. This is creating a crossover in priorities. You have Thiel, Soros. You have some other neolibs that have heavily invested in the notion that with greater economic exchange with China and even economic dependence with China, that China itself would change, that China would become another, you know, world, part of the world liberal order. And it hasn't. And this is what has caused them to reverse course. So you have basically now the blue empire of the United States using language that the red empire is using. And that's far more dangerous than, Trump saying that he's going to make sure that gay marriage is legal all over the world. Um, Ultimately, an even bigger plot twist and crossover than that. Um, so we're seeing a kind of um, I don't want to say a paranoia, but the fear has set in, and they are saying things that even 2 3 years ago they would not have said, and that's primarily why they were against Trump, because I think they felt that it could go on, and we just need Steve Bannon in Hong Kong, and eventually China will come around. But essentially, China has evaded that, and China's ultimately the other big winner in all of this. Um, and that isn't to prop up China or support China. I
I
condemn
mean,
China.
I,
I
I, just, I
condemn them
just,
for
I just think
not being
it's
honest and for allowing its citizens to leave.
yeah, definitely. But I do think it's ironic that only China could let me rephrase this. Only China could be the progenitor of an outbreak like this and still find a way to come out on top of a propaganda war.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, I think the only other country that could pull that off is Russia. Which, I mean, Russia didn't even have to. I don't know. You know, you listen to our rhetoric. Maybe they did create the virus, but uh,
It was created in a Russian lab sent to Wuhan.
yeah, of course.
Why do you think they closed their borders so quickly?
Well,
Yeah.
getting back on track, the one thing I want to cover before I get into the stuff about rushing uh, is, you know, I know this is anecdotal, but I think this is a good springboard into something I've noticed. Now, you've probably seen the video clip floating around of, in Spain, of course, everyone's been doing the balcony singing, especially in Southern Europe. Two guys in berets and like paramilitary uniforms put up a bunch of Franco era flags, like with the old flag of the monarchy, the Francoist flag, and I believe the flag of the Phalange. Put up Roman salutes, and
Yes, yes.
we're playing Franco era anthems. Now, uh, it was surreal because even like the people like recording it, like they didn't sound outraged or anything. They actually sound like kind of pleased with it. But in all seriousness, despite some of the bungling, now you can't base everything on your interactions online, as tempting as it is. Despite some of the bungling with all the internal debates of the internet dissident right, as it were, in the real world, what it seems like, especially within Europe, this has been a major win for the populist right. Now, of course, the Trump movement, whatever you want to call it, MAGA, whatever, has failed to capitalize on some very basic things, which again we've laid out in the past two episodes. But the populist parties in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, for example, Orban, all the big figures have made the case. Yeah, this is the fault of globalism. This is the fault of economic interdependence with countries halfway across the world, and this is the fault of open borders policies. And they've really been pushing that. And look, not to base this all in one video, but my point being is, public sentiments, even if they aren't that open, I think at this point they're more sympathetic to something like that than to whatever people in Brussels or London or Paris are saying.
Right. I mean, last week we talked about how there's not that many woke takes on popular media, uh, except that Chinese are suffering. But I mean, you have polls now showing in the U.S. at least that they are against not just immigration, but they're against movement from state to state, anywhere from 60 to 72%, depending on the demographic, broken down by race and gender. So, I mean, really, like this, we've discussed this before. The crisis is showing how globalism still cannot overcome culture, and it cannot overcome geography, and it cannot overcome the interest peculiar and particular to a people, to a distinct people. All these years of cooperating with China since the 70s has not made China into something that the West would have hoped for. China has used the ingenuity, and it has even used, the liberal values of America and the West in order to get rich. And that's not just at the level of manufacturing within China for American and Western corporations, but that's also in terms of selling those products that are made there. The philosophy of buy next product, wait for the new release, buy that product too, and so on. So they benefited from that. You could argue that one of the ways of containing China is actually not to have pushed this, this consumerist and atomized individual model of capitalism. Would have stemmed China to some degree, and of course, not sending every single vital industry over there. To not even have one important, pharmaceutical company within the U.S. at a time like this is pretty bad.
I'm just saying,
People. I mean, people
only
talk on
only
a dissident.
only Skrelly can bail us out of this, and he's out of prison. Obligatory. I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, like, we we can go on and on about like, when we're supposed to go back to work, uh, and so on. But like, the bigger issues now are like, yeah, everything is going to change after this, but what kind of concrete changes are we going to make? And if we're supposed to continue as life is normal, and even if this involves like moving factories out of China and putting them elsewhere, which would take decades. But even if that could happen in, say, 3 or 4 years, which it won't, but you would still be working with the same model, right? And really, what has this model brought? Like, this model has not created greater reserves. It's created debt, and it's created the ironic circumstances where you have very wealthy nations, but actually on a shoestring budget. So that even a crisis like this, which isn't really on the same level as World War II, is enough to show all the inherent contradictions of this political ideology and this economic ideology.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think
yeah, like, I mean,
I think that's
how are they going to sell this now?
yeah, but I think that's what it boils down to because a lot of the people downplaying this have downplayed what the crisis actually is, saying, "Oh, it's no worse than X, Y, or Z," which some points are right, some points are wrong. Again, the "it's just the flu" or "the flu is worse" has been debunked, but there's a few points they put out there that still have some validity. But I think what it mainly gets down to is not the crisis itself, but the fact that we've lost the ability to manage a crisis to the point where we have to take these measures because we we had no plan for anything like this before. And look, you can get political about this. You can say Trump gutted the CDC. You can say, oh, this is Obama's fault for whatever. You can point fingers all day, but at the end of the day, it's a systemic failure. The fact that again, our shortage in ventilators dates back to the 2000s. Our offshoring of drug manufacturing dates back to the 2000s. Or yeah, to the point where it's like, yeah, look, the crisis in raw numbers, in terms of like all things considered, may not be that bad, but
Mm-hmm.
it's in terms of who's managing the crisis.
Right, right. Yeah, there's going to be enormous fallout, and we're going to see a kind of more systemic job loss than what we saw in 2008. I mean, not only are the numbers greater, but they affect a far greater range of industries. Um, as we spoke about oil, I mean, oil needs engineers, it needs repairmen, it needs trains. If people aren't moving around, how much oil are they going to be using? Uh, so it's all these little things. But that's just one. I mean, we could go on about service industries. America's 70%. I mean, basically like Canada, 70% of the economy is based on service industries. Everybody is shut in. People aren't buying stuff. There's people with apps, I think like Mint. I don't have it, but basically it tells you like, hey, you haven't bought anything in 7 days. Like, you're going to have to re-enter your debit card in order to reactivate your account. So it's literally the perfect neoliberal app. It's telling you you're not shopping enough.
Come on, buy more. I need one more hit. But I think covering all the main topics, I think it's time to get into the peculiar topic, which the show's running a little bit longer than I anticipated, but well. So Trump out there making America great, fighting the real enemies. What he has decided to do most recently, probably one of the most monumental events of his presidency. And I would say this is probably second only to moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Look, now this would be third, but seeing as the way unemployment went, he can't really do the black unemployment thing anymore. But I would say this accomplishment is second. Now, he's taking a stand against the real enemies of the United States, and he declared the Russian imperial movement a terrorist organization. Now, the Russian imperial movement is nothing more than a bunch of guys in Russia who sometimes have demonstrations with czarist flags, and they have no
Yeah.
operations in the United States, no operations in the Western world. The closest thing they can do is somebody who wasn't even a leader of the organization allegedly had some association with some Wignat group in the United States, and again that's even a dubious claim at best. But they're
Yeah.
no Western branches, no even like Western affiliated branches. Like they're not affiliated with any French or German monarchist organizations, for example. No, they're just the Russian imperial movement that is like, yeah, we want to bring back the Russian Empire, and we want to be a monarchy again, and I think the size of the group is only a couple thousand. No paramilitary wing, no openness about violence. It's just literally it's a glorified social club. That's all it is for my research at least, which is limited. Again, I don't really want to go around prying information on a newly declared terrorist group and get myself on more watch lists than I already am on. But yeah, it this look I kid, but this is probably one of the weirdest things the Trump administration has done. Like, you can point to other dumb things he's done, like his foreign policy moves, his immigration moves, and there's always some motivation, whether that's the GDP, defending Israeli interests in the Middle East, preserving the our oil interests, our so-called oil interests in Saudi Arabia with Yemen or whatever. Look, with all these things that are bad and we clearly disagree with, you can at least draw a line to the reason why it's happening. There's no rhyme and reason that I can see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frankly ridiculous if he thinks. I mean, the libs in America are not going to thank him for it. You know, uh, not openly, anyways. So it's going to be no different than bragging about black unemployment rate. That too is sort of irrelevant now. I mean, they never cared before. They're not going to care now. So yeah, I mean, this is ridiculous. And in fact, it's because it's so ridiculous that it's news at all. That's essentially that's it. You
You,
know,
you know what
this is
this
a group
is?
that most Russians are not even aware
Yeah. You know what level of ridiculous this is on?
of.
Do you remember that
So,
story last summer where the Italian neo-Nazi group that had assassination attempts against Salvini stole an air-to-air missile?
oh yeah,
And and one of their group leaders was involved with assassinating an Italian journalist while fighting in the Donbass, and the media tried to paint it like the Donbass fighters killed the journalist. That's the level of absurdity this is on.
yeah, it's just ridiculous, and they don't even have
That's
that
still to
power.
this day one of my favorite episodes. One of my favorite things we ever covered. That one story last summer.
Yeah, it's beyond. Yeah, I don't know what to say other than it's just ridiculous. It's pointless. It's not necessary. Um, yeah.
I mean, it's part of the series of really weird moves against Russia to the point where they've pretty much sanctioned everything they can. So they're going after like these sort of really obscure things, but why start there? Like, why not start with, for example, like I don't know, this may be too close to the Kremlin, so it may cause diplomatic row. But for example, why not go after Zhirinovsky and the Liberal Democratic Party, as he calls it, or some like major Russian political organization, like, and or just something, or I mean, they
Yeah.
declared the IRGC a terrorist group. Declare some Russian state-related apparatus a terrorist group or supporting terrorism or whatever. And it seems like they're grasping at straws because they desperately need to keep this anti-Russia narrative alive because especially now, especially with everything breaking out, nobody cares that Russia annexed Crimea. Nobody cares about the Donbass. Nobody cares about Georgia and South Ossetia or uh, the security of the Baltic states or any of these things. They not that they really cared that much before, but especially now they really don't care. So in the climate of fear, now whether that be warranted or unwarranted, which I would say this is probably one of the cases where it is more warranted just with the pandemic and everything. They're trying. I would say in an odd way they're trying to capitalize on that, saying, "Look at this scary new terrorist organization. Look, they're associated with
Yeah.
Russia." Sort of trying to, again, it seems like grasping at straws, really trying to put something out there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you're right. At this point, it's just narrative driven. There's nothing practical about this. The truth is that it relies on people all having ideas about Russia that like are basically not valid. Uh, like Dugin, as if like Dugin has like some big following in Russia, which he doesn't. You know,
Didn't he actually
um,
lose his like one of his like big
yeah,
positions under Putin? Like, and then like they claim like he's like some like some like sort of like Rasputin figure, and like oh he's secretly
yeah,
pulling the
yeah.
strings of the Russian government. He's everyone in the Kremlin. It's like, and like yeah, like he has a following. I would argue he probably has a bigger following outside of Russia than in.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, when we're talking about this imperialist party, like it's a Russian Orthodox party that, like, basically, wants Tsarist Russia to reemerge. And I mean, make of that what you will, but um,
I mean, so
I'm
does
not
like a
against
third of the
it,
population.
but I don't see this happening very quickly. And the truth is, if you think it's a small number of people that know Dugin, it's even a smaller number of people that know this party. But again, it reinforces certain stereotypes about Russia. So it's just driven for a Western public. I mean, it's not going to have any dramatic effect on the Russian economy. I mean, the most dramatic effect will be the oil war, which is basically inflicting damage to all the countries, and Russia is not exempt from it. But yeah, I mean, weird flex.
Yeah, I mean, it is odd, and as you were saying, Trump has finally gone full Republican in the most academic sense of the word.
Yes, yeah, he's gone like this is a French Revolution Republican.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, I expect, it probably won't even catch on because it's so obscure, but like sort of like the MAGA boomer account, just like tweeting guillotines now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
So
how many levels of Republican are you on? Like, yeah, watch this. But yeah, yeah, again, it is weird and like even though again it is a snowball's chance in hell. If there's any country at all that's going to restore a monarchy, it would be Russia.
yeah, I mean they're the only ones that have a chance in Europe, obviously, because they're the only one that is actually a sovereign nation. So yeah,
You know, you say that, but I mean, Spain. We got into that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
as I
Yeah.
recall, there was a big pandemic about 100 years ago, which led to a formation of a republic, which led to a civil war, which led to a regent coming to power. On behalf of a monarch.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
I'm gonna have to
confusing
take
that with
back my
something,
words.
but yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But whatever. But it is again just completely back on topic. It is just narrative driven. That look, this they could have very easily done this to a neo-Soviet group that carries around portraits of Stalin or whatever.
Yeah.
It's to reinforce the stereotype that and I wouldn't even say it's a stereotype. It's to reinforce the notion that Russians are not westernized liberal Democrats.
Yes. I mean, in some ways, like they're basically driving a narrative that, like, kind of like what's going on with like the globalist elite left. When I was talking about Soros, where like they've given up on the possibility of reforming these countries, right? Because the situation has become very desperate. We've often talked about, the kind of timeline the West has been on, and how many things have not happened in the last 20 years that should have happened with regards to Russia and also to China. And in a way, demonizing them isn't just, demonizing them for a potential war, but it's for a kind of a perpetual Cold War. They can't be reformed. You know what? Forget it. It's not just their government; they're all bad.
Yeah,
So
yeah. They'll adopt the sort of clash of civilizations narrative that they rejected
yes,
and
yes.
derided when it comes to how the Russians, they're just they're a distinct different people from us. But I'm just thinking now. I'm under no illusion of this happening, but wouldn't it be something if within the span of 20, 30 odd years, Russia went from Yeltsin to the return of a monarchy?
Yeah, it would be pretty. It would be pretty base.
I mean,
I mean, there's no. I mean, we don't know. Literally, we don't know what kind of world we're going to get even before the end of 2020. I mean, we can guess. I think we all know shit is going to hit the fan. How that plays out,
I'd argue it already has,
exactly.
and there's more to
Yeah.
come. But I think we underestimated the 2020s based on I said that when the Iran debacle happened, but oh boy, that looks like. Look, I would think just the Iran debacle looks like nothing compared to everything that is happening right now, and it
Yeah.
is wild. It is wild, and I think only proper way to close the show is with a question to you and I guess to the audience that feel free to participate. A little audience participation. Okay, let's say it does happen. Let's say one of Putin's last acts in office, right before he leaves office in 2024, is he pulls a Franco and restores the monarchy. Now, hopefully it's more successful than Franco's efforts, and the monarchy actually
Yeah.
doesn't sell out the country. Um, what less Western leader do you think is most likely to attend the coronation of whatever successor to the throne they dig up?
What Western leader?
What Western
There's
leader?
only one. There's only one.
There's only one,
Macron.
of course.
Only Macron.
Only the Jupiterian president.
Yeah. I mean, you can relate. I mean, Merkel's not going to do it. Uh, Putin will probably have one of his dogs there that will terrify her. So, but yeah, I don't. The British monarchy isn't going to do it because they'll see it as a competition. But
Yeah.
Macron will attend.
The Italians would probably try, but they probably get lost on the way. Uh, yeah, and again, I don't think Blumpf would be up much for it. I think he'd think he'd be jealous. Too much gold. Only that amount of gold's allowed in Trump Tower.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it'll inspire a wildfire. Maybe Macron will actually have his imperial coronation. We can get back to real politics instead of this fake and gay neoliberalism thing. I could say the one wish I have for politics for this show is I want the return of European imperial power, so this show can get really lively.
Yes,
Imagine if
that's
we would have been
right.
around during the Crimean War or any of these other things. Imagine if we would have been able to report on that. I mean, think about how amazing that would be. And we have the opportunity right in front of us, and so help me God if
So
I'm not
close.
going to seize on this opportunity in any way I can.
Yeah.
Well, that took quite the turn. I don't know how that we ended up there, but uh, no, nonetheless, I think we've covered everything. Yet another episode of the War Report in the bag. Unless you have any other last minute topics you need to throw in.
No, I think that's it for me.
Fantastic. Thank you for everyone for tuning into this episode of the War Report that was all over the place and actually wasn't completely focused on the elephant in the room. Fortunately, we got a bit of a reprieve from that. Now, next week, I imagine we'll be right back on schedule. Rest assured. So we'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Take care.